Hello, good evening, and welcome to PM Express. Tonight, you may have heard the news already that journalists will not get the opportunity to vote in the special voting this year. The special voting is a voting system which has been in place to enable security officers and election observers and journalists to vote a few days ahead of the election proper. Now, with barely 3 weeks to the elections, media practitioners are expressing disappointment, belief and anger over the Electoral Commission's announcement that due to legal constraints couched in the newly introduced CI-75, they face a choice of loss of livelihood over performing their civic duty. Now, the media is forbidding, it is now news, to participate in the early voting exercise, which has actively been in place since 1996. It has been the de facto practice of many members of the profession. This enables journalists to give full attention to detailed coverage of the actual election process. Often, the media has been instrumental in identifying election malpractices, and their presence has forestalled many violent incidents. Domestic observers have also been given the option of disenfranchisement in lieu of performing their official duty. Although the GJA has petitioned the Electoral Commission to see if alternative arrangements can be made, the Commission remains adamant. So the question tonight is, what will be the effect of this decision on the overall coverage of the elections? And I have with me Joy News editor Samson Ladi Ayenini, who is also a lawyer, in the studio to throw some more light on the issue with us. And I have the General Secretary of the Ghana Journalists Association, Mr. Bright Bleu, to also share some perspective on the issue. Later on, we're expecting to have in the studio the Principal Public Relations Officer of the Electoral Commission, Sylvia Ano, to also pitch in the discussion. Gentlemen, welcome to PM Express.
Thank you very much.
Samson, let me start with you. You have had the opportunity to study the legal instruments, and what can you tell us about this whole legal wrangle, if I should call it?
All right, Steve, I'll start straight away by first referring to the laws that we are talking about. We are presently discussing Public Election Regulations 2012, that is CI-75. Now, CI-75 is what has been birthed out of the original CI, which is Public Election Regulations 1996, CI-15. Now, in CI-15, specifically Regulation 48.1 provides, and I read, it says, special voter means a person registered as a voter who is A, a security officer, or B, an election officer, or there is a C, certified as such by the commission. Which commission? The Electoral Commission. So you find that there are three ways by which, there are two specific categories of people who have been given the special exclusive privilege to be able to vote before December 7. However, the law provides for the C, or a voter who is certified as such by the commission. Now, in that provision, the addition of the C, it gives the EC the power to be able to certify a journalist, to be able to certify a doctor who will be needed to still perform his duties on election day, to be able to certify some other individual or class of people whose duties on election day may prevent them from being present at their registered polling station to participate in the elections, or also that they may be directly involved in the election process on the election day. So when you read Regulation 21 of the old law and Regulation 21 of the new law, coincidentally, all of them also provide room for even ordinary individual voters, not any special groups, ordinary individual voters, to make an application to the Electoral Commission for their names to be entered into the special voters list. But that application ought to be made 42 days before the election. Now, when it is made, their employers must confirm that their duties will prevent them from being present at their registered polling stations on the day of elections. Now, if the Electoral Commissioner, the returning officer in the particular district or region, is able to certify that, then they will forward it to the EC himself at the headquarters, and they would accordingly certify that person and transfer his vote to the special list and give him the opportunity to vote. What I'm seeking to illustrate is that it is really not the case that journalists had this special privilege like security officers or election officers. It is not the case that we had that privilege under the old law, but it's been taken away from us.
So what was
in
it?
the new law?
What was it then?
The legal engineering in the old law was that it gave the EC a power.
Discretion, kind of.
It gave the EC a certain authority.
Okay.
And by that vested power, the EC was able to extend that privilege to the classes of people that it did extend to.
Right.
And they included the journalists. And that was for good reason. That was for good reason, because we will be actively involved on election day.
Yeah.
On election day, sometimes you are sent to a place to cover the elections days ahead of election day.
Exactly.
So you will not be present. And it is understood and internationally recognized that the media is a critical part of a democracy. And when you are talking about a democracy, you are talking about elections.
Yeah.
This is the wisdom that guided the formulation and the passage of the old law. How that particular provision is missing from the new law, I am shocked. I thought that if you are amending...
Why are you shocked?
I am shocked. Because I'm thinking...
Is it because you're yourself a journalist?
It is natural to expect that if you are amending a law, if you are doing anything to a law, you do it to be in sync with developments. You bring it up to speed with current developments. So it ought to be forward-looking. It ought to be progressive. But what has happened takes us back. Sounds like we are going to Stone Age.
I'll come to you later, Samson, so that we walk ourselves through the legal consequences of this and the possibility of anything happening on election day. But Mr. Blow, the Ghana Journalists Association, what happened? Did you not get the opportunity to have a peep into the drafting of the CI-75 for you to make an input, which would have made it possible for us to have a kind of waiver on election day?
Thank you very much. I must say simply that that did not happen.
That opportunity was not
That
given?
opportunity wasn't given to us. And I cannot begrudge anyone, because this was discussed on the floor of Parliament. And so a few people have called me and said, well, if it was discussed, then it was our duty to have discovered that this is what has happened. But I think that, to be fair to all of us and to this country, a few things happened just around that time. First of all, people must remember that this was not a law that had any direct... This was about elections. It wasn't media. And secondly, it was just at that time that issues of, the biometric, this thing had come up, like the exhibition of the voters register, the review of the 45 new constituencies.
CI-78.
And all these things around, it buried this very small, this thing, compared to the other issues that I've raised, because the biometric this thing was a big issue. And then came the 45 constituencies. And therefore, while we were engulfed in discussing, and then this law, I think that was somewhere in August, mid-August, went through. And in
So
fact,
the Journalists Association were caught unawares.
we were caught unawares. In fact, I must confess, I normally would wake up very early, and it was at about 6:30 when I got a text from the treasurer saying, look,
This is the
there was
situation.
fire on the mountain.
In
And
fact,
I said,
this law, the Gazette notification one was on August, and the law was brought into force on the 28th of September.
oh. So,
Wow.
That's, and I said, wow, what was happening? He said, look, it started last night, and unfortunately I didn't have light at home, the previous
Yeah.
night. So I was unlucky. I'm sure I would have got wind of it. And then no sooner had I finished reading the text when I got a first call from one radio station saying this was what was happening. Well, in the shock, I managed to
Provide
gather
some
myself
answers, yeah.
together, because I must also confess that we have had a very good working relationship with the
Electoral
EC,
Commission
and
over the
therefore,
years.
I must commend them for that. I just said, look, if you looked at the balance sheet, I think that the people of this country would recognize that taking journalists out of that equation, that's early voting, was going to create more harm than good. It's quite obvious, and it's not just because that was the norm, as you indicated, since '96, and also taking into account some of the revolutionary measures that have been taken, like journalists have a right to go to a polling station and report the results and say, look, these are provisional, as compared to those were wonderful, and I believe they had some connection with all, this whole process of liberalizing in such a way that media can help build the transparency
So, Mr.
and the credibility of the media of an election.
What kind of problem do you think this is going to create, especially
A lot.
that a lot of journalists might not
For
be able
instance,
to vote?
when I worked with the GNA, in '96 I went to WA to beef up, because the number of journalists in the WA office are many. But when it comes to elections, you can imagine the number of polling stations around. So 6 journalists or 4 in WA, and for the GNA, that's quite a big number compared to the other media houses, because at that time, when you talked media, you virtually were talking GNA when it came to
National coverage.
the national coverage. And so a number of us went to support our colleagues. And I remember we remained in WA city, the town, the capital, whilst those who were there went to the outskirts. In fact, I had opportunity the following day to go with them. And mind you, we went 2 days ahead of time. And election, when it comes to media, is not just, polling day, but you have to go early, capture the atmosphere, what exactly is happening, are the people ready, are the election officers ready, paint a picture that would provide the whole country some sense of security or concern based on what you have seen. So, as I said, that is not likely to happen, in the sense that there are some areas that are going to suffer as a result of this. We pray nothing goes wrong.
Happens.
Yeah, because
Well,
I'll give you a typical example. Assuming, because all this, I believe, served as a deterrent, having, for people knowing that there are lots of people monitoring, journalists, observers. Obviously, I believe that served as a deterrent. If you wanted to engage in some wrongdoing, you will have to think twice. That is one. Two, what I believe it also does is once you have media spread all over, if something should happen, there is somebody at least to narrate what really went wrong. It was for us to take it or leave it, but considering the work we do as journalists, truth is paramount, and therefore that would be the basis for considering that issue. Now, yes, somebody may say something might happen, and then an election officer might say this is what happened, but it could be what he says against some concern that might be expressed by one party or the other, because remember that these are parties, so they are contestants. So I am saying that we will go through some challenges, whether we like it or not, unless, even assuming, some have said, well, then it's better to recruit people within that region and train them. But look at the time.
The short period.
The short period.
There's also been the argument, Mr. Blow, that for journalists to maintain their neutrality, possibly they should be barred from voting, or they should make the choice of staying away from voting in order to show that you're neutral.
That cannot be right. That because journalists are journalists, they should be disenfranchised. Is that what people are saying?
Is there no basis of fairness in saying that if you want to show that you are objective or neutral, I mean, in the political discourse, then you must possibly not vote?
No, I think this is unthinkable. This cannot be an argument. Otherwise, there are so many people who then should not vote. Because casting a ballot is a fundamental right, a right to choice. So why would we want to exclude others?
And it doesn't matter whether you're a journalist or you're not, or whether you're supposed to show neutrality or not.
What makes you a journalist is to be impartial, but it does not mean that you don't have a position. Otherwise, let's play football without referees, and let's slug it out, but you need somebody in the middle. Most probably that referee even belongs to one of the teams on the field of play.
But they have to still demonstrate neutrality.
The rules require that he's impartial, and the rules are clear. So I do not see why people should think that way and say to demonstrate our neutrality, we have no right to cast our votes. That is not acceptable.
I must say that the principal PRO of the Electoral Commission, Sylvia Arnott, did confirm to us that she will be joining us in the studios for the discussion. So we're still waiting for her to come join us. So we'll continue with the discussion. We'll take a short break and we'll return for more. Stay with us. Welcome back to PM Express. Tonight we are discussing what appears to be the disenfranchisement of journalists by the decision of the Electoral Commission. Something you are a lawyer. You are also in a very difficult position as being a team leader, a news editor. On the day of election, do you foresee that there are legal loopholes which will enable us, chart a different course from this tight situation on our hand?
Thank you, Steve. First, on your question to him about suggestions that journalists should not vote, so they will be neutral, I put the question to you that so to have the EC become neutral, should they not vote? Afari-Gyan and his men, should they not vote?
You tell me if there are any legal provisions.
That contention suggests that by you having your right to vote taken away from you, you become neutral. It is not correct, because we will always have our positions, whether or not we have the right to vote. And you would find a way of influencing the voter somehow.
One way
not on election day, because that is not right. That is illegal. Now, there's a question I've been asking myself, that in 1996, when we're going to go to elections, we promulgated the law, and it was done, I think, in July. Now, we had, unfortunately, this time it was done in August. Not too much of time. Journalists were not consulted to make input into the law. And yet, the framers of the law, and this law, this is a CI. What it means is that it is literally drafted by the Electoral Commission, who is the sponsor. He will draft it the way he wants it, or his legal team will put it together before they submit it to the Attorney General's Department for the legal drafting people to look through before it gets to Parliament eventually. So what you find in CI 15 is what the EC wanted, and the EC wanted to include journalists.
So
what you find in CI 75 and a removal of that opportunity, that window.
It's also what the EC wanted.
Exactly. So the question I am asking Steve is, was this not deliberate? Can you prove to me that it was not deliberate? It could not have been an oversight. So why was it done? I want the EC to explain that to me. The EC is passing the buck and saying, you see, there was a committee that was set up that, provided the draft. This committee, they must answer to Ghanaians why they decided to take the subclause C or subsection C of the particular provision that is regulation.
Is it to suggest that the committee possibly did not appreciate the worth of journalists in even election monitoring? Let's not even push it to reporting the election, but being there as a neutral observer and passing on the information. They didn't see that journalists are important
if
the
they
equation?
appreciated, if that role, the role of the journalist was appreciated, how many years back? The argument cannot be made today that we are okay now and we do not need a journalist. Ghana has such high esteem within the sub-region and within the global community, partly or mainly, arguably mainly, because we are a democracy. And our democracy has been built upon the Constitution and journalists helping to give a vent. So I cannot see why that, had to happen. And so, you see, I'm at a loss as to why it happened that way. And I want the EC to be able to give us answers.
Well, Samson, I'll hold you there and then go on to the phone lines. I'm told we have the Principal Public Relations Officer of the Electoral Commission, Sylvia, Ano, on phone. Unfortunately, she was unable to join us here in the studio, and we got her on phone. Good evening, madam, and thanks for your time.
Good evening.
This is a serious issue, and the question is, why did the Electoral Commission find it necessary to exclude journalists to this extent, seeing that the old law, CI 15, had the provision to make it possible for journalists to take part in an early voting?
Yeah, thank you very much. The chairman of the Electoral Commission stated earlier in the day that that portion, that gave journalists the right to engage in early voting, was based on discretionary powers.
So based on the same discretion, he decided to whittle that opportunity away, right?
So you let me learn.
Yeah.
And I wish I could tell you the reason for the selection of these categories of people, the two categories, that officials of the Electoral Commission and security personnel. I wish I could tell you. Unfortunately, I was not part of the committee that worked. Probably I would have to do a little bit of research, so I would know the reason for the decision.
But are you in support of the decision? If this is a law that has been passed anyway, so it's not like you can do anything about it. But do you think that this is right?
Personally, I appreciate your concerns, but let me just explain it further to you. That there was a committee, and it was made up of members, representatives of political parties. Now, after the committee had finished working, it went further to Parliament for it to be passed. and some things were taken out. You know, they worked on it basically,
So,
and then came out with the CR-72.
right, so they worked on it and some things were taken out. You've just told us that. And didn't the Electoral Commission supervise and monitor those things that were taken out to be sure that they fell in line with the wishes of the Commission?
That is the reason I'm telling
Because
you
the
that.
Electoral Commission was the sponsor of the bill.
That is the reason I told you earlier on that probably I may have to do a little bit of research to find out the reason behind the decision.
But you don't know the reason? The principal public relations officer of the Electoral Commission?
I'm talking about a committee that worked on the
But the
CI.
committee works on the wishes and prescriptions of the Electoral Commission because you are sponsoring the CI.
I can only give you a gist, an idea
Right.
of what, yes. Let me say that one of the reasons assigned to this particular decision was that journalists are spread all over the country. And therefore, if a journalist, these, for example, let's take a radio station. The radio station may have some affiliates, you know, throughout the country so that they can spread their tentacles wide and cover the whole country. So that if somebody is in Buguyoyo, you may not ask the person to travel all the way to Accra to cover elections there. And secondly, there was this notion that journalists, some media houses go for, you know, people who are not journalists and then ask them to cover the election. You know, and it creates some kind of problems. So these are the two basic reasons that I can tell you readily.
Right. So let me ask you, the Ghana Journalists Association has made a petition to the Electoral
Yes.
Commission through the chairman.
Yes.
Is this something that you are considering favorably?
I don't know whether you listened to Dr. Kuja Farijan today at the forum, because he said that, you know, the initial response at IPAC yesterday was that the journalists were going to be given, those who were going to be accredited to observe the elections, they will be given some kind of priority. So that on election day, if you're a journalist covering the election, of course, when you get to the polling station, you won't be asked to join the queue, but you proceed, cast your vote, and then leave. On the other hand, you know, if you are not covering, you just vote like all the other members of the general public are going to do, or the electorate.
So let's take a scenario like a scenario where myself, for example, on election day, will have to come into the studio and go live on radio from day one and link up with all our reporters calling in and sending information from all across the region. I am very much unable to wake up in the morning and go to the polling station at 4 a.m. and finish queuing and get back to base and coordinate the election early enough. Do you not have provisions for anyone in my situation like that to enable him dispense, one, his civil duty, and two, his job?
I do appreciate your concern. Looking at those particular scenarios is going to be a bit difficult, you know, irrespective of how you strategize. But the GJA is still insisting that there may be an opportunity. So let's see what will happen. Let's keep our fingers crossed. There may be a window of opportunity, although Dr. Farijan has stated clearly that it will be difficult.
But do you appreciate, let's put it on record, do you appreciate the challenge journalists are going to face in covering the elections because of this exclusion?
I do believe in what journalists do on election day. I do appreciate what journalists do, being the fourth estate of the realm. And as watchdog, you know, of the electoral process, I do appreciate your concern. But what can we do? How do we strategize to make sure that we do our work and at the same time cast our vote. What do? We need to think through. The DJA may keep on.
It doesn't seem to me that you have a better appreciation of the enormity of this problem. CODEO, the election observers, are also in the same category as journalists. What are you saying to Ghanaians?
Have you talked to? Probably we have to go further, try further to find out the reason for Parliament. Also Parliament passed it, all right. So maybe we have to find out from some members of Parliament what really happened on the floor.
All right, Madam Silviano, I'll hold you there, and then we'll still continue with the discussion in studio. And later on, if we have to come back to you, we'll come to you to continue the discussion. Thanks very much for your time.
You're most welcome.
Samson, I didn't quite get it from Madame Silviano. She doesn't know the reasons why this exclusion took place, and it doesn't look like she can do anything about
Steve,
it.
you see,
and earlier I was asking you whether there's any legal loophole we can take advantage of.
I can tell you what can be done legally, but I'm sure that we are getting too late in the day that we
can I go to court and take legal action
option
under the circumstance?
Now, let me tell you what option you may take legally, and that is where I say I am not amused at all at Dr. Afari-Gyan's sometimes apparent intransigent position, inflexible nature, posture to voters who have complaints, or people, stakeholders in the business who have complaints about election-related matters. Now, if we had to go to court, it is possible. And this is how that will work. Voting is my constitutionally guaranteed right to exercise. No law, any law that attempts, or any administrative process that attempts to take that right away from me is inconsistent is inconsistent with the Constitution, and null and void as far as it is inconsistent with the Constitution.
Yeah.
Now, when it is straight law that ignorance of the law is no excuse. So you may say that the law, or CI 75 in Regulation 21, provides that even an ordinary voter has the right to apply 42 days before election day to be given the opportunity to be included in the list of special voters. The question to ask yourself is, when was this law passed? This became law on the 28th of September, 2012. In law, there's something we call reasonable time. Between the time this became law and the time we are going to have the election, will you be able to convince any court that there was reasonable time for the voter to be educated on the content of the law, so they could avail themselves of the rights provided them under the law?
Yeah.
A court, I am afraid, will not sanction any attempt to force reasonability within the period. So, let's ask ourselves again, because of that particular special circumstance and the circumstances we found ourselves in the delay, the lateness in having the legislative processes, completed on time before we have the elections, I think that a court will reason in favor of the voter who is a journalist or who has some other duty, for which reason on the day of elections he will not be able to be at his registered polling station to cast his ballot. He will have the blessing of a court. He will have the favor of a court to be granted the opportunity within the short period to be included on the list of special voters. I think that is a position that can be firmly and comfortably urged upon a court of law, because it touches on my human rights I am a journalist. I have a right to cover the process on election day. I have a right to vote. On election day, I may not be available at my polling station, and that is the reason I should be granted the opportunity to vote earlier than that. Why that has been taken away, I can appreciate that Sylvia should not be able to answer to that question, because we are being told now that it's a committee that was put together to draft the law. And after they drafted the bill, it moved on to Parliament. And so ask the drafters, ask the parliamentarians. You see, that I find an excuse, but not good enough an excuse.
Good enough excuse. Mr. Blue,
Yeah. Okay.
it does appear that the Journalists Association, your hands are tied.
Very tight. In fact, we are in handcuffs, looking at looking at the whole development. But there's something that baffles me, and I think that one important lesson we must be learning out of what has happened is that in nurturing our democracy, for anything that has something to do with the core, like elections, and especially when we have a benefit of an old law, it's important to engage those who will be affected. In fact, if that committee had called those who were going to be taken out of the 1996 one, had been engaged, I am not saying that people should not have opinions. Like someone said, well, they thought that journalists were, like Sylvia was saying, journalists are spread all over the country. And therefore, most probably, they might not need. It would have been very good if they had engaged GJ and Giba. And I'm sure in explaining the way we do our work, they would have realized that this position that they were taking was not one beneficial to the process of lecturing. Yes,
very sad.
You know, but that didn't happen. And so this is a very big lesson to us. Again,
Would you say it's a slap in the face of our democracy?
Yes, I indicated straight from the beginning that considering the progress that we've made, the projection from 92, some of the radical, call it revolutionary, this thing that the EC brought that, like Samson said, has given so much credibility to the process in Ghana. That is the envy of other African countries. Why would we go back?
You find it very worrying.
Yes, that's what baffles me.
Would you advise your
members? If you're not very careful, we could again do something nastier than what we've done now.
Would you advise your members, say, for example, to boycott the coverage of the election?
Some have asked
Total
me,
blackout.
Some have asked me, and I said,
you wouldn't
I'll be the
that.
last. I wouldn't recommend that. The people of Ghana are innocent. They won elections. Yeah. We have decided that we want to go, democracy. And if there is a problem, it has to be solved democratically. But I think that a boycott by the media would be most unfortunate.
It will be. It will be very grave.
Very grave. You can imagine the chaos that this would bring. There'll be disputes all over the place. There are lots of people who might genuinely lose an election, but say, look, the media, there was no transparency. The media didn't participate. This happened, nobody heard about it. So I would not recommend that. Some of that I said, look, let's think of how we can, surmount this problem. And one, as we said, was to go to the regions and recruit new people, in spite of the dangers that are likely to occur.
That will definitely come with cost implications.
Precisely, with cost implications as well, because that's an additional cost. Multimedia going to a region and saying, I want some teachers, you will have to pay them.
You definitely have to pay.
Whereas you will go and do this job, you'll be paid your normal salary, except that you will receive some allowances for accommodation and food.
Well, my name is Stephen Antia, and you're watching PM Express. And it does appear that there will be very little we can do except go to court and perhaps just keep talking about this situation. We'll take a break, Samson, and when we return, I will talk to you about how we'll get around this. Stay with us, don't go away. Welcome back to PM Express. Samson, before we went on the break, you wanted to tell me what the way out will be, really.
Really making the point that I thought that, we haven't gotten to the point where we should be heading to the court unless we have a Farijan repeats that refrain to us, and I suspect he will not do that at this time.
So you suspect that he will bend?
Not as in bend. I think it is expedient to be done that looking at the special circumstances. Well, in law, when we say special circumstances, it means more than the ordinary usage of the word. What it means is that look at the ingredients that go into creating the special circumstance. The ingredients are as follows. We were late for a number of things. This law ought to have been passed earlier in time.
Say 6 months ahead.
So that people will get familiar with it, and they would have gotten to know that there's a provision allowing us 42 days before elections to apply to be on the special voters list. That opportunity did not exist. You cannot say there was reasonable time, and we did not avail ourselves of it. I am sure that if you go to the EC and check, it is most probable that no single individual has been able to access or use that particular provision, or you may find that they are very limited. That will tell you
maybe we
that
should put
too
that
many people
to,
do not know.
Madam Sylvia, no, if she's still on the line,
so
to
on the whole,
establish how many people have so far taken advantage
so on the
of
whole, the EC has the opportunity, reasonably and by law, to say that because of all of these circumstances,
extenuating circumstances,
it is all right to allow a certain window just for this period. And I'm sure nobody will begrudge him for that. Nobody will drag him to court for that.
Right. Let me see if Madam Sylvia No is on the line. Madam, if you're still there, thanks for staying.
Yeah, I'm here.
Now, the argument is that there is a lot the Electoral Commission can do, including considering the special circumstances, the extenuating circumstances under which all this happened. That is the fact that they've not been reasonable time for the law to, become accessible to a lot of people, and that the Electoral Commission can do something about this. Is this something that the Commissioner will consider?
It will be difficult for me at this point in time, to say, to comment on this. Because if anything has to emanate from the Commission, it has to come after a meeting by the Commission.
Right, so, yeah, I do.
It would be very difficult for me to say anything now. Now, let the GJA pursue the matter, and let's see what will happen.
So, Madam, tell me, this 42 days that was given for individuals and people like journalists to apply for a waiver, how many people have taken advantage?
Are you talking about journalists applying?
Yes. Ordinary people. I mean ordinary people.
No, those who have been given the opportunity to do so are only officials of the Electoral Commission and the security personnel who will be working on election day. These two categories of people are the only people I know, as far as the law is concerned, as far as the CI 75 is concerned.
But Madam, the law, the CI 75, it's clear. The section 21, subsection 1 says that a voter may apply to the returning officer of the constituency in which the voter is registered to be entered as a special voter if, as a result of the election duties, the voter will not be able to be present at the polling station. The limitation you're putting on it is wrong.
That is the interpretation as far as the Electoral Commission is concerned. I don't readily have the documents with me by virtue of where I am at the moment.
Right, so
I don't know, but what I do know is that these two categories of people are entitled to apply, so that even then, anybody who will be working is supposed to have applied
Well,
already.
well, I'm putting it to you by the
Mm-hmm.
contents of the same law, which is regulating this, that it is not only these two categories, and that by law it is more broader than that.
That is subject. It's a matter of interpreting it the way you probably understand it. But what I do know, as far as we are concerned, is what we have put across to the general public.
And you would not be able to tell me how many people have applied within the 42 days window that was given?
Not immediately, but that can come afterwards.
But can you hazard a guess to tell me how
guess?
many people may have registered by now?
Unfortunately, I cannot guess.
Okay.
I need to get the facts right and let you know probably by tomorrow.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much, Madam Sylvia, for your
You're
time.
welcome.
It's been a pleasure to talk with you on PM Express. So, Mr. Blow, we are back in the same situation. You will expect the Electoral Commission to definitely respond positively to your request. Is that what you're hoping?
Well, as I said from the beginning, we've had a very cordial working relationship with the EC, and I know that is still the case. So I won't say it's early days yet, but it's not too late in the day, as Samson indicated. There's still some time to be able to resolve this problem for the sake of our democracy. For me, that is what is important. And therefore, when the impression was given that some committee was formed, made up of political parties, I think this matter goes beyond political parties. This is something that has to do with the DNA of our democracy.
Exactly.
We have been, touted in the sub-region, probably in the whole
So
of
you
the
would
world.
say, I don't know, but you would say in stronger words that this is inexcusable, that for anybody
I
to
think that
overlook this role.
Precisely, and
It's
especially
very
as I
strange.
indicated, when in the 1996 one, that was what was there, it's become part of the culture, and
Something, would
all
you
of a
say it
sudden
possibly was an
we-
oversight? Could it be? It might have
oversight?
been an oversight that it was left out.
This is too fatal to be an oversight. I can't imagine it. You see, if there was a failure to make an addition to the existing law, you could say that would be an oversight.
But this is
But to
a
remove
total
what
expulsion.
existed cannot be an oversight. It cannot be an oversight. I can't see that.
Cannot be oversight. Well, let's hear some of what you have sent us. Joe Banye from WA says, it is obvious that this matter will affect the work of the media, whose role is key in the democratic process of Ghana. But that is the situation at hand, which therefore require a great sense of patience and sacrifice to run this delicate job for our dear nation. And Randy JT from Obuasi, you say for fairness and security, EC should allow journalists early voting in December 2012. And Louis Nana Ofori-Kwao, you say that if it is in the law, which suggests that media practitioners should not participate in the early voting, I would entreat them to respect the law. That's your opinion, Louis. And then Afre Joseph says, why EC? Big question, why Electoral Commission? And Chinebe Eric, you say that the Electoral Commission is behaving as if this is the first time we are voting as a country. The media should be given the chance to vote. The EC is afraid that the media will uncover some of the inefficiencies in the electoral process. We are all ready to give the support they may deserve, and the country I'll end there. And John Latte says, please Steve, leave Sylvia alone. She cannot justify and or explain. And Aberiga David Lincoln says, was the Ghana Journalists Association invited by the committee in charge of the bill now passed into law? No, he said. Mr. Blow said no, the Journalists Association was not invited. If no, then I suggest we hold our policy makers accountable and the Electoral Commission as well. John Latte again says that we are in an era of unprecedented decisions. And Evans Entry, you say that what the Electoral Commission PRO is saying is not right, because how can you say that there are journalists all over the country, so there is no need for early voting? Evans Entry again says, I don't get it, Electoral Commission. Joseph says, last Sunday, the Minister of Education, Mr. Lee Okran, on your program said the upgrading of Hafasini Senior High School started by MPP was still at ground level. The minister was telling lies because, we're not discussing education. So something, I know we're out of time totally, but tell me, under the circumstance, what would you as an editor be doing to go around this problem so that at the end of the day, whether we have the opportunity to vote early or not, we'll still perform to our professional standards?
We're beginning as a team to think about what to do, but we are hopeful that by close of week, tomorrow, and hopefully
we will have
next week, the EC should be able to tell us some good news, because some reporters have to be where they have to do their work days before the election. You can't disenfranchise them in the manner that we are beginning to fear might happen.
Mr. Blue, what will be your final words?
A final word, hopeful that the people of this country, as I indicated, this is nothing to pin on political parties. It's for our democracy. And therefore, whatever we can do to, still maintain the pedigree, I think that we've got to do that. Because assuming something goes wrong, it might not probably be the fault of what we have done now, but people will say, we told you so. So let's avoid this from happening.
The media actually protects the EC on election day.
Well, gentlemen, I'm very grateful.
Don't leave
for
it to the
time.
politicians.
And, you heard them saying we shouldn't leave it to the politicians. Bright Blue is the General Secretary of the Ghana Journalists Association, and Samson Ladi Ayanini here is a legal practitioner and is an editor, Joy News editor for Joy FM, Radio Joy. And then grateful to Sylvia Arno, Principal PRO of the Electoral Commission, who joined us on the phone. And thanks to you, our audience, for all your messages. Join us again tomorrow for PM Express Personality Friday. Constituency Watch follows right after. Good night.